Imagine for a moment that you could time travel. You step out of a machine into the dusty heat of the Judean hills. Exactly 3,000 years ago, you walk into a marketplace. You hear shouting, bargaining, laughter. The sounds are guttural, rhythmic, ancient. Now, imagine you grab one of those merchants, pull them through the portal, and drop them onto a sidewalk in downtown Tel Aviv today. They would look around at the skyscrapers and the traffic, completely bewildered. But then they would hear a sound, a mother calling her child, a news report on a radio, and the shock would hit them. They would understand, not everything, maybe, but enough. They would recognize the bones of their own voice. This scenario shouldn't be possible. Languages don't work like this. Usually, over 3 millennia, languages mutate beyond recognition, or they simply die, leaving nothing behind but inscriptions on cold stone. But Hebrew cheated death. It is the only example in human history of a language that had no native speakers, zero, for nearly 2,000 years. And then, suddenly, woke up. This isn't just a linguistics lesson. This is a ghost story. It's the story of how a sacred code, locked away in scrolls and prayers, was dragged into the sunlight and forced to describe spark plugs, internet memes, and nuclear physics. How did a language that was effectively dead for 18 centuries become the mother tongue of 9 million people? To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning, before the revival, before the Bible was even a book. We have to go to the dirt. Archaeologists digging in the region have found the receipts literally. One of the most haunting artifacts is a tiny piece of limestone called the Gezer calendar. It's not a royal decree, it's not a grand poem. It's a scribbled list from a farmer in the 10th century BCE. It breaks down the year: 2 months for harvest, 2 months for planting, 1 month for flax. It's rough. It's practical. It is the voice of a man whose hands were covered in soil, speaking the language of King David, but using it to manage his crops. This was Hebrew in its first life. It was a muscular, living thing. We call this Paleo-Hebrew. If you look at the shards of pottery found in the ruins of Lachish, the ancient text messages of soldiers facing the Babylonian army, you see a language in crisis. These are urgent dispatches written moments before a city fell. They capture the panic, the logistics, the very real human fear, all in a script that looks more like jagged lightning than the block letters we know today. But languages are fragile. When the Babylonians crushed the kingdom of Judah in 586 BCE, they didn't just take the people, they broke the linguistic ecosystem. The exiles found themselves in Babylon, surrounded by Aramaic, the English of the ancient world. It was the language of commerce, of empire, of power. Slowly, inevitably, Hebrew began to retreat. It moved from the kitchen table to the synagogue. It stopped being the language you used to yell at your kids and became the language you used to speak to God. By the time the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE, the death warrant was signed. The Jewish people were scattered to the winds: Rome, North Africa, Persia, and in the diaspora, you speak the language of your neighbors. You speak Greek, you speak Latin, later you speak Arabic, Spanish, German. Hebrew was boxed up. It became the holy tongue, Lashon HaKodesh. Now there is a misconception here that we need to clear up. People say Hebrew died. That's not quite right. A dead language is one that nobody uses. Hebrew was more like a language in a coma. It was frozen in cryostasis. For 1,700 years, it was used every single day, but only in very specific, high-bandwidth ways. A merchant in Cairo could write a letter to a philosopher in Spain, and they would write in Hebrew. It was a secret handshake, a global code. During the Middle Ages, this dead language was actually doing calisthenics. Poets in Spain were bending biblical roots to write erotic poetry. Philosophers like Maimonides were translating Aristotelian logic into Hebrew. But, and this is the crucial but, no one was dreaming in it. No baby cooed in it. If you stubbed your toe, you cursed in Yiddish or Ladino or Arabic, not Hebrew. It was a language of the head, not the gut. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you take a language that belongs to the library and put it back in the nursery? It requires a kind of madness. Enter Eliezer ben Yehuda. Picture this. It's 1881. A young man from Lithuania, tubercular, frail, obsessed. He has this radical, almost hallucinated idea that the Jewish people cannot be a nation without their own language. And not just a new language, the old one. He moves to Jerusalem with his wife, Deborah, and he makes a terrifying vow. They will speak only Hebrew. You have to understand how insane this was. Imagine deciding today that you will only speak Shakespearean English to your family. But harder, because Shakespeare had words for table and chair, Ben Yehuda had to scour ancient texts to find words for everyday items. When he couldn't find them, he had to invent them. The real drama, though, happened when they had their first son, Ben Zion. Ben Yehuda decided this child would be the first native Hebrew speaker in 2,000 years. This wasn't just parenting. It was a laboratory experiment. He forbade his wife from singing Russian lullabies. He isolated the boy from other children so he wouldn't be contaminated by other languages. Visitors were silenced. The house was a fortress of Hebrew. There are stories that neighbors thought he was abusing the child, creating a mute. The boy didn't speak for a long time. The tension in that house must have been unbearable. And then, one day, the dam broke. The boy spoke, and he spoke Hebrew. It was the proof of concept. If one child could do it, a generation could. But Ben Yehuda needed more than one child. He needed a vocabulary. He became a one-man factory of words. He looked at the Hebrew root for lightning, barak, and created the word for telegram, mivrak. He took the ancient word for a chaotic, glowing substance, hashmal, and repurposed it for electricity. He was literally building the bridge from the Iron Age to the Industrial Age, word by word. He faced massive resistance. The ultra-religious in Jerusalem were horrified. To them, Hebrew was for talking to God, not for buying vegetables. They excommunicated him. They threatened him. But the wave of history was on his side. Thousands of immigrants were pouring into the region, fleeing persecution in Europe. They spoke dozens of different languages: Russian, Yiddish, Polish, Arabic. They needed a common tongue just to survive. Hebrew wasn't just an ideological choice anymore. It was a pragmatic necessity. The tipping point came in the schools. Ben Yehuda and his allies pushed for Hebrew in Hebrew, teaching physics, history, and math strictly in the language. It was brutal at first. Teachers were making up terms for molecule and denominator the night before class. But the children just absorbed it. They took this heavy academic language and they ran with it. They took it to the playground. They started inventing slang, swearing, making jokes. That is the moment the revival truly succeeded. Not when the scholars wrote dictionaries, but when the kids started fighting in Hebrew. Today, the result of that experiment is a chaotic, beautiful reality. Modern Hebrew Ivrit is not the pure language Ben Yehuda imagined. It is a melting pot. It has the structure of the Bible, but it's full of loan words. When an Israeli says sababa, they're using Arabic. When they say telenovela, that's obviously not from the Torah. The syntax has shifted influenced by the Yiddish and Russian of the early founders. It is a language that is constantly shedding its skin. There is an Academy of the Hebrew language that tries to keep order, inventing official words for podcasts or algorithm, but the street usually wins. The language has a pulse of its own now. When you stand back and look at it, the story of Hebrew is a testament to the stubbornness of human identity. It challenges the very laws of linguistics. It proves that a language is more than just a tool for communication. It is a home. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people carried this home on their backs, folded up in books, and then, against all odds, they unfolded it, shook off the dust, and moved back in.